Thank you. All right, so let's start. Sorry for this little delay. Okay, so good afternoon and welcome to everybody. Thanks for joining in person or tuning in online for this debate on Europe's alleged technological dependency. I think it's fair to say that up until recently, we lulled ourselves in what turned out to be an illusion. So the illusion that by increasing the number and the complexity of our commercial links, we would become so close with our international partners, our interests so intertwined, that no contingency could break us apart. This is, I think, is a bit the principle which lies at the foundation of the European Union. And yet, now we are witnessing the evaporization of that illusion. Even the most irrational behaviors by international actors become realistic. So game theory somehow seems to have lost its predictive power. So we are forced to think what before was considered unthinkable. It was unthinkable that the owner of a large online platform could retaliate to a fine imposed by the European Commission blocking its advertising campaign. It was unthinkable that the EU antitrust chief would feel blackmailed by the US, that European companies could refrain from using cloud services for fear to be locked in a kill switch scenario. And it was unthinkable that the US could openly codify in its national security strategy the goal of interfering with the European internal democratic process. But here we are. So all this is happening, all this is real, and we need to deal with it. Now, I think a first challenge to do that job is to cut through the emotions. Yeah, of course, all these issues are very emotionally charged, but I think that if we get carried over by our impulses, if we become reactive, we run the risk to aggravate the situations. So, for example, I mean, I don't think the right reply to blackmailing is protectionist, being protectionist, sorry, or to dismantle our regulatory framework, of course. So I hope that the discussion today will contribute to bring some structure to the public debate, to orient it towards the analysis of the problems and the solutions, rather than to the emotions that it elicits. So the plan is the following. We have three fantastic speakers with highly complementary backgrounds and expertise. We have Alexandra Ghese, who is member of the European Parliament for the Greens and co-founder of the Eurostack initiative. Then we have Robin Bergeon, who is a technologist with a long experience at the interplay between public governance and digital technologies. And then we have Darren Ennis, who is Group Director of European Union Affairs at Vodafone. Well, thank you very much for joining the three of you. So we will have two rounds of questions in which I will ask each speaker to speak for a maximum of 4 or 5 minutes. In the first round, we will focus on identifying the problem, and in the second round, we will focus on possible solutions. So after that, I think, yeah, solving. No, I mean, like exactly. I mean, like, you know, that's for the audience. The audience will try to solve. No, after that, we will have like, I think 20 minutes, more or less, to 20, 25 minutes to have some interaction with the audience. And you can ask your questions with the microphone or using Slido. The code is UTech. Okay, so let's start. Sorry, I talked already too much. So round one, the problem. Robin, we'll start with you. Can you please help us understand, is it really true that Europe is technologically dependent on third countries? And in what ways? Is there something that we still need to do to know better where we are most vulnerable?
Yes. No, but so more seriously, it's absolutely true, and I think there's broad consensus on this, that we are too dependent. The dependencies are real, the dependencies are there. However, I think there's still a lot of room for improvement in how, in developing a shared understanding of the details of those dependencies. There's a poor understanding in general of what constitutes digital infrastructure and how digital infrastructure is able to govern anything that sits on top of it, and then from that understanding how to counteract that how to what strategies exist to replace it. And so, like, for instance, to give some concrete examples, I think anyone who followed the recent Digital Sovereignty Summit will have seen that depending on speakers, it's kind of all over the place. People, have very different understanding of what sovereignty is and what to do about it. But a lot of the focus tends to be on cloud and AI. And I think those are two mistakes. It's not that those are not important, but they're each maybe like 5% of the problem. There's still the remaining 90% to be dealt with. The thing is, like, if you think that cloud is the only infrastructural problem we have, or the primary infrastructural problem we have, then what you're going to do is invest in cloud and develop like European alternatives on that, and expect the problem to be basically solved. But there's so many other dependencies, and so a mapping of those dependencies would be valuable so that we can gain consensus on that. But it's challenging because every dependency dependencies tend to be industry specific. So again, to give an example, if you're developing, say a media website, I'm speaking from experience here because I worked for 5 years at the New York Times, you have a lot of dependencies, and they will be very different from area to area. You will, for instance, 80% of your traffic will come from search and social. So right there, you need, those are people who can set rules for how you publish with them, how you publish on the web, how you make your content available, so that you follow their rules, and you have to, because this is essential to your survival. Your revenue will be, split between advertising, where this is a strong dependency, and you're being taxed by those companies to the tune of 35 to 80% of your revenue. You will also depend on subscriptions, where if those subscriptions are bought on your app through the App Store, you will also have to pay taxes to Google or Apple based on ownership of the App Store to the tune of 15 to 30%. These are all numbers that are higher than the corporate tax rates in most countries. And so those companies are just like systematically using those dependencies to tax these businesses. And so a course mapping that at least lists those dependencies, and I just listed a few for media, but we could talk about this for like hours. A course mapping would at least help people understand where the problems are, where they sit, and it would help us prioritize, because there's so many dependencies. We can't go like, okay, we're going to address everything at once. We have to pick the ones that would be most effective, most salient, that would liberate the most potential. Like, again, to return to the case of media is in crisis. But I get really annoyed when I hear people say that we haven't figured out the business model of online journalism. That's not true. Like, the business model of online journalism works perfectly fine if those companies were not taxed, 30 to 80% of their revenue by tech monopolies. They would be doing great. Like, most companies would go under at that kind of tax rate. And so, whatever the exact shape that kind of mapping exercise takes, we need to develop agreement on the structure of the problem, and we badly need that at this point.
Great. Thanks also very much for keeping the time. The idea is that maybe, okay, there is a sense of urgency, but we are also rushing a bit too much, no? The solutions, maybe we find the solutions, but then we realize that these are the solutions for other problems. Okay, no, but that's very interesting. Okay, thank you. Darren, your turn. So let's say Europe has strong dependencies. I think we can agree with that. How does that dependency manifest itself on markets? So do companies, for example, refrain from going cloud or AI or other, of course, or in other dimensions, let's say, change their behavior because of these increased risks?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me. In case people don't know who Vodafone are, I wanted just to clarify why we're here. We're more than just a telecom operator. We're a pan-European operator. We're also the largest operator in Africa, but we're also the largest IoT platform outside of China. So we are we are a company with a global perspective, not just so we see sovereignty from a global perspective, not just from a regional one. So we're very keen to engage in this debate. And Robin, let's have a beer sometime and discuss the merits of journalism. I was 20 years a journalist here in Brussels at Reuters myself, so something we can share, I think, over a drink at some point. But yeah, going back to digital sovereignty, I agree with Robin. It's nothing new. The Trump effect and the geopolitical tensions have just basically accelerated it to the top of the agenda here in Brussels. Something that we very much welcome, but for a company like Vodafone, it's important that what we describe, that sovereignty is done right and it's done correctly. So you asked about how does it manifest itself. Well, first of all, as I said, it's not new. If I take, let's take the big picture and why it has manifested itself is that the saying that the US innovates, Europe regulates, and China copies, sadly, I think, is partly coming sort of home to roost in that those of us who've been around Brussels a long time, the European Union has thought it can kind of regulate its way out of this. I think Letta and Draghi have identified that this was part of the problem, and we probably drifted to a level of not just over-regulation, but actually is it, we need more smarter regulation. So at a high level, that's probably where it manifested itself. And then at an actual operational level, there are three areas in which it manifests itself. Data sovereignty, so European data is often stored or processed using infrastructure and software governed by non-EU laws or actors. Operational sovereignty, key operational decisions, updates, business continuity, etc. measures are basically carried out at headquarters outside of the EU. And then technological sovereignty, where we're reliant upon nuts and bolts from chips through to hardware that are basically manufactured and developed outside of the EU. So that's essentially I think sets out the challenge that we face. How do we then move to solutions and what we describe as this sovereignty done? But maybe we'll get to that in a moment. But I think you're telling me not to jump to some of the ideas. But I think one point I wanted to pick up on Robin made, which the mapping of dependencies is super important. But where's the mapping of the risks? I think we see that there is a lot of mapping of dependencies. I would agree with Robin, it's not always to the same level, but we would also like to, we also think that we need to see a mapping of the risks. Why? Because that's where you get into the de-risking versus decoupling debate. And our worry is that we move to having too overly restricted measures. We also, our view is that we need to work with trusted, like-minded partners. But to sum up in terms of what we would like to see is moving away from that manifestation, which is, as I said, the train sadly has already left the station in a lot of these areas, whether it is cloud or elsewhere. We can't do anything about that. And we want to see a focus on where Europe can lead, right? Let's not look to the past, let's look to the future. Things like quantum, or for our sector, for example, we for a long time have been pushing the idea of Open RAN technology where Europe can scale. So and I don't want to get into the high-risk vendors, just let me finish because I think it's important. This is a prime example of what I started with. I don't want to get into the high-risk vendor debate, but what I want to sort of give you an example of is maybe if the EU and member states spent as much time concentrating on how to look at to the future and scale and evolve solutions such as Open RAN, quantum, other technologies, instead of spending all of their time on the protectionist negative bringing regulation, maybe we wouldn't actually be in the position we're in today.
Thank you. I mean, okay, this is a. I mean, I hope that we will discuss about that like a little bit later in the second round. But I mean, just a quick question I wanted to ask. So, a big telecom operator, how does the fact that most of the cloud market is owned by American companies essentially affect the decision for that operator to go cloud? For example, I mean, just a concrete example. Is it possible that big companies, in your view, would refrain from using cloud services because they are afraid of this dependency on American companies?
Very simple. We work with any partner, to be honest, if it provides our customers with the best service, but in a safe, secure manner. So to sum up, we will work with European cloud providers, absolutely. And this comes back to my point. Often when I would sit in the European Commission and I'm opposite the other side and they're telling me about, oh, we need to work with this European, EU vendor, European vendors. Absolutely. But give me their business card when we have grown them, when we have scaled them, and when they're able to compete on a level playing field. That's the question we need to be asking. It shouldn't be just a flag-based approach. We need that. That's the question that we need to answer.
Sounds clear. Thank you. Okay, Alexandra, please. So we are still in the realm of the problem. So how do you think tech dependency reverberates on Europe's public policy? So how this affects our regulatory autonomy, for example, or our democratic process? I mean, we had quite a few examples in the last week. So. I mean, I guess, but
well, we have examples the whole time. How does it affect democratic process? Well, I think it's all in the national security strategy of the U.S. It's all very clearly written down. What are the goals of the U.S.? No, it's really official. It's not just Trump speaking about it in a way where you can still say, well, when we don't know whether he's serious or not. It's basically abolishing the European Union. It's bringing so-called patriotic parties into power, replacing the existing democratic parties, whatever you think of them. That, in the case of my country, Germany, is a party that has very close relations with Putin, and that is deemed anti-constitutional by the authorities of my country. And then they say also in the strategy what the instrument is, and those are the tech companies. And they want the tech companies to be able to operate in Europe without complying with our rules. That's, basically what the strategy is saying for Europe, on top of a series of other things that I wouldn't share. And that is exactly what they have been doing. Start with X, for example. We have studies for Germany, for Poland, and for the United Kingdom that show very clearly that the algorithm boosts far-left pro-Putin and far-right parties. That's AfD in Germany and BSW. It's Konfederacja in Poland, for example. It's not even peace. It's Konfederacja, and it's reform, but also to the right of reform of Nigel Farage, it's Rupert Lowe in the UK, for example. And all these studies show this is not even linked to engagement-based ranking, which is the basic idea of a normal social media algorithm, but there's something on top that the researchers say very diplomatically they can't explain. But I, as a politician, can speculate, and I think it is simply manual manipulation of that algorithm. There's a lot of evidence that Elon Musk did that for his own account prior to the US elections. The day he said he would join the Trump campaign, basically you see the engagement and retweet rates and visibility rates for his own account go up, and then a few days later for all Republican accounts, but not for the Democrats' accounts. And this is something that the European Commission has been investigating since the German election, when this was very obvious that there was manipulation. In Germany, just to make that example, because I think not everybody is familiar with these numbers, that meant that a pro-Putin far-left but anti-migration party and AfD, so our far-right party, together, only because of that effect, already dominated 50% of the timeline. And then there's the engagement-based ranking effect on top, and there's the bot network effect on top. So this means there's agenda setting. You know, still a lot of journalists, a lot of politicians, also in the Brussels bubble, look at what is happening on X, what is trending on X, and think that's public opinion. That has absolutely nothing to do with public opinion. But it led to the German election, that prior to that, everybody discussed migration, while what people really want to talk about was cost of living, affordability, and housing. And no party except AfD wanted to talk about migration, you know. Want to talk about the economy, about lots of things that bother real people, but they managed to set an agenda. And that is just one example. There's similar numbers for TikTok, that when people follow a range of accounts from all parties, 80% of the content they see is far right. So the platforms basically decide not to feed users the content they choose, to have their freedom, but to decide what ends up in their timeline, and that is mainly polarizing, divisive content, and this is what everybody knows. But in the political realm, since you specifically asked the question, it's far-right content. Mm-hmm. In terms of information, media versus disinformation, it's disinformation, it's speculation, it's lies, because that works a lot better for the general algorithm. So what we engage with is what makes us angry, so it's content that makes us angry. And that boosts disinformation, and it creates a business model for people peddling disinformation. So disinformation is not a cost anymore for the ones spreading it, but it's a business model. And that has really profound effect on our political landscape.
Thank you. I mean, but just as a quick follow-up, I mean, that doesn't necessarily need to be the case, right? That if you are dependent technologically, this would
no, it's a business model. It's nothing to do with the technology.
Exactly, but what I mean is that, you know, as you said, there are rules. If they would be enforced, maybe, I mean, like, you know.
Well, we have rules. It's called the Digital Services Act.
Right. Exactly.
And that is an Article 34 that says if there's a systemic risk for public discourse and elections, the companies have to fix the algorithm, they have to fix the targeting model, and a series of other things. It's all laid down in the piece of legislation, and the Commission is choosing not to apply that article right now. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, round two. Let's focus on the potential solutions, and we start with Darren. So my question is: do you think the markets can somehow develop their own answer by themselves somehow? No? There are some cloud providers. I'm sorry, Robin. I mean, okay, I'm still hooked to the cloud issue because I mean I don't know all the other. You're right. I mean, like we lack this mapping exercise, but I mean I think cloud is still important. But so there are cloud providers who are now offering sovereign cloud solutions. So does this make sense? Do you think the markets itself? I mean, like if you put the market in the right conditions, will address this issue of technological dependency, or do you think that we've still need like some kind of strong public policy intervention?
I would agree, first of all, with Robin that this issue does go a hell of a lot beyond cloud, but we'll deal with cloud today. From our side, just to say, we're not starting from scratch. For example, Vodafone, we're already investing in European and have been European sovereign cloud capability. We have 24 agreements in place in 27 out of the 27 member states, including in our own 10 markets where we have deeper relationships with a number of European cloud providers. But the problem now is, what do we do when it comes to 6G and 5G standalone? Like when we come to the sort of the newer technologies, because that's where we need, again, the investment for European cloud providers to be able to accelerate and to catch up. So one example, for example, is that we're investing in a sovereign cloud reference model, which is basically designed to align with EU regulations and also give us a sense of digital autonomy. There's also the Euro 3C project. We're a founding member of that. We again would like to see that accelerated and really drive proper market-led solutions. So we're talking about market-led solutions. And also, you know, I think though this all comes hand in hand with identifying, because you can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. We would need to work with trusted operators, both within the EU but also outside the EU, because it's a global market. You know, cloud is a global. We're talking about global solutions. You know, I think. I like to use our satellite actually as an example. So we're launching our satellite company, and it's with AST Mobile. And AST Mobile historically come from the United States, the technology. However, our headquarters will be in Luxembourg. The satellites are built in Barcelona. Our innovation center is in Malaga. And only 2 weeks ago, we announced that the control center and the operations center will be based in Germany within European. So for us, that's an example of sovereignty done right. The technology already existed. We can't wake up tomorrow, as much as we would like, if we're going to compete with some of the, let's call a spade, the larger US satellite operators. We can't flick a switch tomorrow morning and go, let's go head to head with them. But what we can do is to create this solution in which we can grow a European platform. And our platform is for direct device, but it's also a wholesale option where we want European operators to come on board and come together collectively and create a European alternative to the options that are available at the moment. For us, that's an example of how you create a market-driven approach to sovereignty.
It's a great example. Thank you. We definitely need more than of that. Alexandra, how do we address tech dependency with, let's say, more from a public perspective? So. You are one of the co-founders of Eurostack, so I mean, you definitely are looking at this. And if I ask you whether you really believe it could work, I'm sure that you would say yes. But we have, we are a bit burned with other experiences, like, I don't know, Gaia X, of course. I mean, that would be like the let's say the easy comparison with something that recently that didn't really work. I'm also a bit concerned with this idea of buying European, which sounds to me a bit protectionist in general. So tell us, I mean, how do you think, we can address this issue of tech dependency with some public coordination?
If you ask me, can it work? It depends on what exactly. Can de-risking work? Building European technology in Europe? Yes. Can we flip a switch and be completely independent tomorrow? I have to admit, I do not believe that. But going a little bit back to the risk, I mean, what is the risk of not doing it? I think that's also an interesting question, and you might want to go and ask that question to Nicolas Guillot, who is a judge for the International Criminal Court, and who can't use his credit cards anymore. He can't use the banking system anymore. He can't stay in a hotel. He can't rent a car. There's a lot of things he can't do anymore because he has been sanctioned by President Trump for doing his job, for holding up international law. And I'm from Germany, and we had for a long time an economic model that was based on very cheap gas from Russia. And we were very successful with that economic model because we paid less for energy than everybody else. And then, there came the moment when Russia invaded Ukraine, and they decided not to give us that gas anymore. And it was a pretty bad wake-up call, I can assure you. So what I'm saying is, let's start building things in Europe. I agree we can't regulate our way out of it, but I think that's not the right way to put it. Because if we don't have a regulation, there's no such thing as a void, as a vacuum of regulation. So if we don't have regulation, and this whole call for deregulation is private companies will decide what the rules are. And that is not going to be our Mittelstand, our medium-sized companies and the small and medium ones that what we love so much. It's going to be 7 US companies who will decide what the standard is. So the question is, who are we making the rules for, and is there good or bad legislation? And I agree, we might have too much and bad ones, and this is what we need to fix, but there's no such thing as no regulation. So what can we do from a public point of view, especially from a European point of view, to support them? How did the US tech companies grow? They grew on a lot of government contracts. Palantir worked with the CIA funding in the beginning. The cloud companies got big government contracts. So why are we giving our government contracts, which our taxpayers pay for, to US companies? 80, 90%. That doesn't make sense. So that's a good way to start. And this is not about publicly distributing money. It's not subsidies. It's not funding the industry. It's creating a steady flow of demand, which is exactly what the US government does. I mean, they do a lot more right now than we ever did. And this is when you talk to European cloud companies, and we have lots of them. If you listen to politicians in my country, it feels like we don't have cloud companies in Europe, and this is absolutely not true. There's a lot of them out there, and some are big, they're very efficient, they're very good. They might not have 100% of the functionalities a US tech company can offer, but they might have that in 5 years, and they might, do a technological leap if they get a steady flow of demand. So how do we create that steady flow of demand? The Cloud and AI Development Act, for example, can define categories of data, different categories with different levels of security and sensitivity, and some of them will have to be stored by European companies. And then you can classify the companies, the data centers, and then you match the two. And that is a very flexible system. It's not shutting anybody out. It's not flipping a switch, but it is creating a steady flow of demand for really secure data storing and especially AI data processing capacities in Europe. And that would help our companies to grow. And it's not something that China or the US are not doing. On the contrary, I think we are really, leaping behind. You have to look at what this government is doing. I mean, they're paying up stakes in private companies on rare minerals, for example. I mean, the fusion between the state in the US right now, the government and private companies is amazing. This is something that we are not seeing. We are still spreading this narrative in Europe. Eurostat, it's all about subsidies and funding, which is absolutely not true. And the US, it's all private capital and private companies. And if you look at what is actually going on in the US right now, it's exactly the contrary. So that is one thing we could do. The other thing is the Public Procurement Directive, which is up for recast revision in 2026. And I do understand that buy European sounds a little drastic. But if you say, in the digital area, we will need very strict criteria in terms of security, regional value, added value, and data sensitivity, and so on, nobody's listening. If you say buy European, you get people's attention. That is the point. It's a political point. I think we will not say right in that directive that starting from 2027, all products bought and procured by member states, authorities will be completely sourced in Europe. This is highly improbable. But we should be fighting for it. And then we will come out, especially in the digital era, with different categories, different sectors, and where at least public authorities have to take that into consideration. And this is not only about technological independence or sovereignty, which is very important, which is not autarky, it's a mix. You know, it's diversification, it's understanding what you're actually building, it's building it to your standards, being able to change it, having companies that abide by your regulation, but it's also about creating jobs by companies that actually pay taxes in your country. You know, what is the political economy of all this? If the whole economy goes digital, it becomes a lot of AI, and we outsource these services to US companies whose government is saying, we want to make sure our companies don't pay taxes. Yeah, we're discriminating actively European companies right now because their tax rate is so much higher. We get the private taxing that Robin mentioned. You know, Amazon is doing it. The AI companies will be doing that. They will be extracting added value from Europe, taking it to other places, paying very little tax, and we have people losing their jobs. So this is where we need to go.
Okay, no, thank you. I mean, of course, one should be then ready to sustain some trade-offs, right? I mean, like, because you're selecting the winners, and I mean, like, you are, you know, potentially increasing costs, and yeah, I mean, like, so I mean, this is not it's a costly option. I mean, like, you know, yeah. Well, I mean, like, otherwise, if you just have a very competitive process in public procurement, you would expect that, you know, if the European, let's say, company in question would be the most efficient, that it would win without having been selected. But
strongly disagree with
okay,
that.
But then you need to, I mean, like, then you need to change the rules. I mean, you don't need to say, I mean, like, the European should have an advantage, but just make the streamline the process in order to allow companies that are more efficient to win. It means that the problem is with the competitive process.
No, I disagree strongly with the assumption that the companies are not winning because they are not efficient and they don't have the best price.
Why
they
are they
not
winning?
Well, because the network effects. For example, if you're a public authority, you have a Microsoft product running, and then you need more cloud space. Obviously, Microsoft will not even tell you need to buy cloud. So yeah, I'm going to give you a service that makes sure that product runs. So you split maybe the service from the cloud provision, and you solve the problem. I mean, It's a little bit complicated than that. Network effects and the massive lobbying. I mean, we know that here. These companies spend more than 100 million only in Brussels. They spend this money in capitals. That kind of presence is very, very hard to match for a medium-sized company in a member state.
Totally.
And sorry, but to add to that also, control over procurement processes is a space that's like extremely boring and no one looks at it. But it's where, like, you know, the theory that these companies are efficient actually meets the reality of, like, they've spoken to people such that they've imposed templates in procurement processes. And I know a lot of, like, smaller companies, they see the call for tender come out, and they're like, there's no point in contributing to this because these are questions made to make Microsoft win.
Exactly, but my point is that, I mean, the process is problematic, and also, I mean, like, if you would have strong competition enforcement, which I think we don't have, then, I mean, like, you would address the network effects and all that stuff. So I think, you know, fortunately we have this drastic solution of buying European, but I mean, like, I think it would be better to make the efficient, you know, the whole process. Sorry, I mean, like, but no, I understand. Okay, the final question then, I mean, like, because I really would like to open up to questions also with the audience, but of course, I mean, like, you know,
I want
to ask, of course, no, I want to ask you because, I mean, like, I think it's very important. I think we often tend to miss the big picture, no? And we end up in a paradox somehow. We attempt to become more independent by kind of trying to become like the others, I feel. Like, you know, like the one we want to get emancipated from. And in the form, I mean, like, you lose your identity and you lose agency. So it is a paradox. So my question to you, because you are a technologist, I mean, it could be, you know, should we address dependency by kind of trying to develop a different way of, you know, to conceive technological development, and something alternative more than, you know, building a lot of data centers? I mean, can we think about technology in a different way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to get out of the way, like from the get-go, I think there's absolutely no value in monkeying what the US is doing. again, as I said in the first part, like infrastructure governs its users. And so if you have authoritarian infrastructure, you end up with an authoritarian society. And, a European Google, a European Meta would actually be catastrophic. We have enough homegrown authoritarianism already. We don't need to develop our own oligarchs, right? And so it's challenging to think of alternatives because the alternatives are things that might have seemed possible 20 years ago when people were imagining much, wilder internets than what we have today. But we can make that effort to figure out what other models would be. And I think, again, returning to the idea of a mapping of understanding the dependencies, understanding the power structure, understanding not the technicalities, but the political economy of technology and how, who has power, why, how they influence things, can really help us find new models. And every time we see, and that's something, for instance, that people I've been working with in India have been doing an interesting job of. So, for instance, they've noticed that whenever you have a two-sided market, that two-sided market, of course, creates power for the market operator, whoever runs the marketplace, and then the biggest such market will tend to grow bigger until everything tilts and there's only one two-sided market that's operated by one marketplace. Okay, that's a dynamic that's pretty straightforward. We've seen it 20, 50 times in tech. And so they've decided to intervene with a mixture of policy and tech, and the tech is developing interoperable protocols for marketplaces such that you don't get a marketplace operator, you only get participants that can then cooperate. And this is the kind of thing where you can bring technologists and policymakers together to have a conversation where both understand, and then the technologists can go and design the protocol that works for that, and the policymakers can design the regulation or whatever other tools that are needed. And so in that sense, that's why I really think I wouldn't want to drive everything from the commission or any kind of centralized place, but we do need, or at least it would be very valuable to have some kind of shared strategy across this space, because we need to coordinate a toolbox that includes, on one side, regulation. Yeah, I completely agree with Alexandra. There's no such thing as a deregulated market. Markets are made of rules, right? But we need to coordinate regulation with building alternatives, fostering ecosystems, anti-monopoly action, etc. And these things need to be coherently articulated, not in detail, but at least at the level of a strategy. Also so that we are legible to potential partners in Brazil, in India, in South Africa. We have friends out there. And then based on that strategy, we can look at places where we would intervene. So for instance, there's a lot of opportunity right now in social media where we could be building alternatives. There's emergent systems that we could be investing in, reinforcing. That's what the Eurosky project is about. But also politically, because of the landscape we have, there's this complex of essentially fashion turn media of X and Meta and YouTube and TikTok all working together to basically topple democracy. So there's opportunity and value in driving an alternative there. So a strategy could identify that and focus on that, for instance. But also another priority that we might extract from that strategy would be focusing on ad tech. That's where the money is. We're talking about a market that currently operates at $600 to $700 billion a year. That's on track to hit $1 trillion within a few years. If $1 trillion goes to people who are working against you, well, they're gonna kick your ass, no matter what you do. And so intervening in that is a way of redirecting that flow of money. So I could come up with a bunch of other examples like that, but unfortunately what we're seeing, for instance, at the commission level from our leaders is stuff about AGI. I can't believe that President von der Leyen would say that. No one even knows what AGI means, let alone announcing it for next year. That is absolute nonsense. Same thing, the omnibus. I've only looked at the data part because I've worked for 5 years on GDPR compliance. If you want simplification of the GDPR, call me 24/7. I've implemented it at the New York Times. Very complex situation, but there's no simplification in what they're proposing. It's all nonsense. If we spread more data, AI will descend from the sky somehow. This omnibus will only help big tech. And so there's no coherent understanding of the problems. There's no coherent strategy. If we had that, and maybe we could, if we had, for instance, some kind of commissioner in charge of tech sovereignty, and working on these problems, it would help. But this is really doable, and I really think that in terms of a different model, tech right now feels like a trash fire. Whatever you're using, whatever you look everywhere, there's problems everywhere. We can build an alternative model of tech where people actually delight in using it. And in my mind, a European vision of tech is, of course, democratic tech, stakeholder governance, markets where there's actual competition, regulated systems such that they're safe. And I think in a sense, it's almost like living in Europe, which is something that's actually quite pleasant. And we could have an online world that is like living in Europe, something that's attractive and that you actually want to do.
Yeah, yes, I can so much agree with that. It would be fantastic. Okay. No, it made me think when you said about AGI and on the line about Kate Crawford that refers to AGI as a big distraction, right? That brings you away from the problems where they really are. Great. Okay. Sorry. It was super interesting to hear the three of you, and so I mismanaged a bit the time, but I think it was worth it. So I think we still have 15 minutes because we started a little bit later. So if you can bear with me, we will get until 2:05. So we have 15 minutes. Do we have questions in the audience, please? And we also have Slido, so I don't know whether they can be put also on the screen for the speakers here, but please go ahead. Yeah, and say your name and please.
Morning. Oh, okay. Hi. I'm Massimo Flore. I'm a strategic expert on disinformation, information manipulation for our fellows, and thank you for the presentation. I want to introduce another element on the debate, which is the rising issue of synthetic intimacy. So I'm talking about the generative artificial intelligence models. They are creating this intimacy with users. So the problem here is that we are talking about dependencies about chips or technologies or companies, but here they are just, should we talk about dependencies, also the cognitive dependency? So how the European citizens are just manipulated and is manipulated a way that they can just create their judgments or they inform themselves, because this is the technology that's going very fast and basically nobody is talking about that right now. Thank you.
Very important question. Shall we collect another couple and then, I'll let you, yeah, please. And another one here, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to learn a bit more about the concrete risks that you actually see.
Tilman, say your name.
Yeah, I'm Tilman. I work at Brugge. Right. So I feel like I'd like to learn a bit more about the concrete risks that we run into when we are not digitally sovereign, and how we would prioritize them. Because I feel like when we do that, the policy strategies follow naturally, basically. So I like the points about Nicolas Guillot and Elon Musk interfering in European elections, but specifically about cloud. What do you think are the risks of our data being stored in the US? What data are we afraid of losing? How could that happen? And what can we do about it?
Great, thank you. And we have a question here, please.
David, I'm with Microsoft, but talking here more as a European citizen, right? Concerned with what I see, what you alluded. Before I ask my question, right? I very much agree with the need to be specific in this debate, right? And not go from, hey, there is a dependency, it's a problem, unless we go to the specificity about where it happened, what are the consequences, what are the risks, how those risks are compared to other risks, and unless we prioritize our actions with a focus on de-risking, there is a big risk that we lose our energy on things that at the end are useless, right? Also, I think there is an oversimplification here in the sense that we tend to look at the technology And we tend to forget that it's technology are ecosystems. They're full of network effects, around their usage. We could say, hey, sorry, we don't like that we have only 2 operating systems for mobile telephony, Android and iOS. Let's build one. It's a lot more complex, right? Because you need to build a device, you don't have the apps, you need to convince the people to do the apps. They won't do that before the people buy all these network effects and things like that. So I think that when we have a discussion, a bit like what we have here, although it was a bit more precise, where we stay at the level of dependency, sovereignty, build European and things like that, we may overlook a lot of the complexity and the realities, and we may spread ourselves too thin over too many things. And therefore, my question to you, what can we do as a society to get more accurate, more specific, to solve the real problems without staying at the level of words that are very comforting, right? Say, do you want to be sovereign? Everybody can raise his hand, right? But it's not going to help us, right? Unless we get specific. And one last example, talking about data sovereignty. If you talk to people in the Baltic, data sovereignty for them means I want to have a copy of my data in a data embassy in Luxembourg in case the tanks cross the border. And for some other people say, no, it's in my country. So unless we go to that specificity, we're going to fool ourselves, spend a lot of money on things that are going to look great on paper and won't make a difference for solving very serious problems we have in Europe.
Yeah. No, great, thank you. And the last question from the floor, then there are some Slido questions, but we will, you just address these ones and then maybe.
Thanks a lot. I'm Stefan Mengel from Germany's Perm Rep, responsible for research, technology and space. I would like to touch upon the European Competitiveness Fund, which is about to respond to dependencies, respond to the Draghi analysis, and linking research better to industrial policy than ever before. Is that an answer to the question raised in this meeting? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. Great. Okay, so who wants to? Let's just have like 2 minutes each. And you address the questions that you prefer. So cognitive capture, where are the risks, the specific problems, and space. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
As you wish. Who wants to start? Please.
Okay, I'll jump in on intimacy. Specifically, I think that the way I would look at that issue is the continuation of a process of mediating access to information systematically and doing so in ways that basically hook people into systems where the information flow is controlled. So I would tend to approach that problem within the broader landscape of information manipulation and the destructuring of social information. And I think we absolutely don't have time to go into that, but there's a whole avenue of research in understanding better what makes quality information, what makes a healthy information environment, what makes a healthy interaction from a person to an information source. I think a lot of that ties directly to democracy. I think people always say science is not a democracy. I think actually science is one of the best examples we have of a democratic system, but these are things that we need to develop a much better understanding of so that we can address them. In terms of risk, I think, again, trying to make this a short answer, I wouldn't focus on data in terms of the risk. I don't think the risk is over data. Of course, data informs about things, and you don't want to lose your personal data. But I don't think where the data is important. I think I would focus on things like your identity online, which mediates your access to so many services, is controlled by a tiny number of companies, including maybe your email operator in a number of cases, and that enables them, as Alexandra was saying, with the case of the ICC judges, the moment you're sanctioned, you have access to nothing. And controlling some very critical things like that has direct influence. I think in my mind, it's a good approach to compare what we have to traditional infrastructure. If for instance, our ID cards and our energy grid and our transportation system were all in the hands of foreign and increasingly hostile operators, then we wouldn't be having debates about sovereignty. I hope, we'd be doing something about it. And so that's the understanding of risk for everything that's online. Forget the tech. Make it the same service in the physical world, and I think the risks become immediately very apparent. If your hospital is running on those things, tomorrow morning it could stop operating. In terms of being specific, I completely agree. I don't think there's a magic wand that can make us be specific about anything. It's just, to be blunt, a lot of fucking work that we have to sit down and do. There's a question from a Lucas online about like the European Parliament's, it's tied to this, the European Parliament's report on tech sovereignty that I believe is still not out of plenary. That was a very good report. And there was a lot of content in there. I think Alexandra was a big part of that, unsurprisingly. And so that is the kind of work that needs to be done. But to give an example, you gave the example of operating systems. I think it's a neighboring example. Like, we could have much better sovereignty in search and browsers together without developing alternative solutions, just by applying the DMA in a smarter way. Not the blunt instrument, not having tea with tech monopolies, but like implementing it in a way that structures that market intelligently without necessarily building. So, and I'm sorry, I completely forgot your question, but I've spoken for a long time.
It was more the European Competitiveness Fund, whether that helps to reduce the dependencies.
I don't know. I don't have an opinion on that, but I'm sure the others. I've spoken a long time, so I'm sure the others will. Sorry.
Just before we get to the two of you, of course, I'm going to reply to these questions, but there are a couple of questions that on the slide that are directed to you, so maybe I mention them as well, so that so for Darren, you said that if the EU acted differently in the past, things would be different, and maybe we wouldn't have fallen behind. But today we are behind. How would the regulating change the reality of today? That's the one question for you. And for Alexandra, could a high standard of security and quality in terms of data sensitivity, protection of public speech, etc., push European governments to favor European companies' public content, essentially to change the criteria that are used to allocate contracts, right? Instead of just saying you're European, but putting the different criteria. So please, and also please feel free to address the previous questions.
Alexandra, you go first, because I know you want to address some in the room. I'll address the question that was to me at the end, and we can wrap up then.
I start with the high standards. So the Slido question was to give one example, and that answers a little bit also the Google question. In terms of cloud, I mean, there's the US Cloud Act. So the US government has access to data that is held by American cloud companies, basically. So that means that, for example, patient data of my German medical system, I wouldn't want to like to see there, because I wouldn't want to have the risk that President Trump sees, this MEP is really annoying. Let's figure out whether she has some kind of bizarre illness or something, I could talk about. I mean, it's an extreme example, but you get what I'm saying. To make it more real, there was a case of AWS, I think it was 2020. There was a far-right social network, was called Parler. I think it still exists, I don't know. And those were at politically different times, and AWS kicked Parler off their cloud, which at the times, in people speaking about digital rights, was a big thing, because we didn't like fascists to have their social networks, like people from my political stance at least. But from a rules of law approach, it should be the law. It should be lawmakers in a democratic countries to decide what is legal to say and what is not illegal, what is not legal, and not a cloud company. So I was very critical of that decision, and this is something we're risking today. We're talking about, maybe new social media in Europe. What cloud are they going to be running on, and when can President Trump tell Google, AWS, Azure, you're going to sanction these people, kick them off their cloud? That's a very concrete risk. There's a lot of concern in the industry around IP, obviously. And I get a lot of things that I can't quote because it's all confidential, but of companies, also media companies, telling me, we get threats because we are in that cloud and certain things we can do. There's an intellectual property being stolen. Nobody wants to speak about it, so it's not public. But these are things that seem to be happening. I can't say that for sure because I can quote sources, but this seems to be happening. So there's a lot of concern. That's the concern. On the concrete priorities, Well, in an ideal world, you get the European Commission to sit down and do a mapping of all the dependencies, of all the risks, of all the opportunities, because I think the opportunities mapping is super important, to speak about how many opportunities are there for our economy, for our businesses. I think that is, we were supposed to talk about that and we didn't manage. We're still at the risk level, but the great opportunities that are in there, this is something we should be talking about. So ideally, we have all this thing mapped out, and then we have, a great committee of very wise people to decide, what are the priorities. But we all know this is not how the world works. We tried to do that a little bit. I mean, Francesca Brea and Paul Timmers did that in one of the Eurostat reports, at least for the technological part, to sort of map the dependencies and what we could do about it. But then there's the whole part that Robin mentioned in terms of political economy and taxing system. I think we have to just do it as we go, because it's too late to do it otherwise, and do one step at a time. On what was the Article 34 DSA, it's the article on systemic risks, for example, for public discourse and electoral processes, but also on public health, for example. So it's interesting also for the agentic AI question, and a series of other things. And I haven't seen it applied so far. But I asked the Commission several times, for example, to look into engagement-based ranking and also the algorithms that I described in my first intervention, and see whether that's not a systemic risk for electoral processes and public discourse, as I am convinced it is, and a lot of people are. And I haven't seen any outcomes of the investigation. So let's hope they're coming. We have an oral question in plenary, and the Commission will have to refer whether they're using this or not. So interesting to watch plenary Thursday next week. This is what I'm referring to, and I think that's an extremely powerful article to address a series of issues we are having. On the AI thing, I think this is a really big thing in the US. I'm in touch, for example, with parents in the US who lost their kids because of suicide, because of this agentic AI, creating psychological dependencies. And it's an extremely, extremely serious issue, which we could be partly addressing under the DSA if some of the AI, the chat bots get designated under as VLOPs. Partly under the AI Act. This is why it's very problematic that there was so much deregulation under the AI Act, because the more data you have, you more can obviously manipulate a person, and that also that a part of the AI Act will probably postponed by a year, and then nobody knows what happens. So we are not addressing that, although we're seeing the big risks in the US. I think that's,
Thank you. It's great. It's very difficult to stop it. It's very interesting to hear what you're saying. So, but we are really running late. But Darren, you have your 2 minutes, 3 minutes to conclude, and you will have the last word. Let's say.
Yeah. So maybe I quickly answer the question. It's only fair to person. So first of all, what would have changed? We probably, hopefully, would not be having this debate, because we would have created what we call a level playing field. What do I mean by that? So just to be clear, we're not talking about complete deregulation. What we're talking about a modernization of the rule book that is fit for future and fit for the current digital age. So there are good examples: GDPR, SMP regulation for our sector. So we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. However, if we look at our sector, the code was introduced in 2016. It wasn't implemented, I think, until Poland maybe have been the last one in 2022. We had COVID in between, where we saw a digitalization of 10 years take over within 4 years. We've seen 1,000% increase in digital traffic. But we have a rule book of which rules that your SMS messages are treated under the current framework, but a WhatsApp message isn't. And that's essentially at the core of what this debate is actually about. It's not about just, again, to clarify, what I'm talking about is that regulation in itself will not resolve this. It is regulation alongside innovation. Innovation in products, services to customers, but also innovation in how we actually regulate, one that matches each other. And if we had that approach, we would have, as I said, more likely to have a level playing field, and we would not create this situation where it becomes flag-based and and tit for tat. In conclusion, for me, we have now reached a crossroads, and I'm talking from a global business perspective. We either have a Europe which, on the one hand, does sovereignty done right, which improves our security and economic prosperity, but remaining open, innovative, and globally competitive. Or there's the alternative, a restrictive protectionist approach where we treat all third country dependencies equally risky. In other words, a completely flag-based approach. And that's the choice that we have. For Vodafone, and I think for most people in our sector, we believe that we must now proactively engage to ensure that Europe's digital future is open, secure, resilient, competitive, and sovereign, but done in but also focused on a risk-based and modular approach. Because I think what today has summed up is that it's not a one-size-fits-all, and we can't just tick boxes, whether they're procurement boxes or funding, who has access to funding or who doesn't have access to funding. It's a very as a company like Vodafone, where we are, operating in Europe, Africa, US, and globally, supply chains. It's not as simple as just a made in Europe or a buy European solution. We need to come up with a much more sophisticated and thought through answer to this problem.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you, for the patience. I'm sorry we spilled over a bit but the debate was very rich. So please join me to thank the speakers, and you're welcome to engage, with a coffee. If you